Well, what have we here? It must be Wednesday. Wednesday must mean live stream time, and live stream time means great guests. Hello, everybody. I'm Bob Harris. I say that with a great deal of enthusiasm because I'm very enthusiastic about being Bob Harris. There's a few things better in the world. One of them, though, is bringing my friends onto this very program, and we have a great one today. Hello, James. Hello, everybody. Thanks for coming. Appreciate your time. If you're just like stumbled onto this and you don't know what the hell is going on, I am Bob Harris. As stated at the top of the program. And you're at the Football Diehards on the hot seat, and we'll have Pat Fitzmaurice coming on here in a moment. I just want to thank you all for coming on. As always, we're here every Wednesday at 7 p.m., every Saturday at noon. Those are Eastern times. So we appreciate you coming and joining us. Hey, Dame. Hey, Charles. Hey, JSC. Pretty happy to have you all here. John Bonneville. Oh, we got some Devin A-Chain talk here. He's bulking up. We're going to get into all that. So without any further ado, I'm going to go ahead and bring on my guest for today. You know him from FantasyPros and BettingPros, where he is the managing editor there. And you know him as the host of the Fitz on Fantasy podcast, Pat Fitzmaurice. Pat, how are you doing today, sir?
Great, Bob. Good to see you. You mentioned a great guest. I'm looking around. Is there someone else you invited besides me, or am I the great guest?
Really? You're all I got. Oh, man. You're all I got. So the expectations are high. Expectations are high. We're going to ask a lot of you, and we'll get questions from the group here. Is anyone who's heard Pat on the Football Diehards radio program on SiriusXM Fantasy Sports Radio knows he's a fantastic guest, super knowledgeable, and on top of all the latest developments. And there are all kinds of developments, and I think that's part of the fun of this time of year, Pat, is kind of divining what is true and what is not. I always talk about it, you're building a string of data, a continuum. And what you're using with the information we're hearing now is you're plugging it into that continuum and you're comparing what's happened a month from now, 3 months from now, 2 weeks from now, what we heard versus what we said. Basically, what we're doing is we're finding out what kind of liars everyone is. Because everyone is essentially lying to some degree. Hopefully we're getting some truth out here. But just in general, when you're looking at the news this time of year, what are you looking at and what are you looking for?
Oh, man. I know it's discerning the real from the BS is so interesting. Like these newsy tidbits like Ron Rivera just discovering that Antonio Gibson is on his roster after last season. Yeah, what a pleasant surprise that you've got a 6 foot, 228-pound guy who runs a sub 4.4 40 and can catch passes. So yeah, I guess I'm like, that's it, Bob. I'm like sort of trying to filter out the stuff that sounds like obvious BS. The stuff about, Michael Thomas potentially being 100 catch guy this year. Now that, even with Chris Olave being the new sheriff in town, I guess, that obviously, sets off alarms on the BS meter. But, there are some little nuggets that maybe do sound a little truthful and, basically just trying to put everything through that filter and see what, comes off as genuine.
Yeah, I think most every lie is some version of the truth, right? And whether it's, they're lying by omission and just keep components out or not giving us the full story, there's something to them. And that's why we like to talk about them. Hello, Andrea. Hello, Albert. Hello, Mr. Scampers. Thanks, everyone, for coming. Again, if you have questions throughout the hour, please give them to us. If you want to go check something out while you're listening to us, go to FootballDiehards.com. It's a website. I'm told it's fantastic. And it's where I work, and you'll find all my stuff there and a lot of other stuff there, including all John Lob's rookie information. We'll get into some rookies here too as well. Use the promo code DieHards to get 15% off on all of the aspects of that. You'll already go to Fantasy Pros, where you'll find Pat's work and the work of everybody. It's a great site. Love the rankings there. Expert consensus rankings are fantastic tool to use in this industry and great stats, tons of great stuff there. So let's get into some of the things. I like the one you mentioned, by the way, the Michael Thomas thing, because I think there's two storylines concurrent. We're all going to pay attention to the part where, oh wow, he can still be a 100 catch guy. Also, he had some hardware removed from his foot recently. Do we feel like that's a good news or bad news situation that it happened recently? It's great that it came out. I'm sure it's a good progression, but does this seem ideal?
Oh man, like we've been thinking that for like 2 years that this thing has finally been behind him, and like there's always some development on the foot front. Like, so maybe let's say hypothetically, Bob, that this is it. Like the removal of the hardware is it, and somehow Michael Thomas makes it through a 17 game season. Like, even if he does, I can't see him approaching 100 catches now that Chris Olave is there. After what we saw from Olave as a rookie, and I think when Olave came into the league, like he was one of these guys we were pretty confident about making the adjustment to the NFL because he was probably widely regarded as the best route runner in last year's wide receiver class. And he's got, 4.4 speed. And, like we just kind of saw all that. And I can't imagine Michael Thomas surpassing Olave, on the totem pole, the target totem pole there. So, I'm just like fading the idea that Thomas can still be a 100 catch guy. Maybe he can stay healthy. Like maybe there's a possibility. And if he's, truly committed to football, which has been kind of another issue with him, he can be productive and be fantasy viable and maybe at least be a depth piece on your roster this year. But man, like I'm not expecting a return to past glory by any stretch. And, he's probably still a guy I'm going to be shying away from in drafts.
I feel like he's one of those wide receiver 4 or 5 ideally type. John Bonneville agrees in the chat. I was buying the MT hype last year. I was too, because we heard it from like really, one of the things we try and do this time of year is we try and listen to reliable voices. And the most reliable voices in New Orleans, all of them were saying the same thing. Mike Triplett, John Hendricks, people who are there in the building every day were saying positive things about Michael Thomas. And so I don't think they were necessarily lying. Maybe they didn't know the whole story. But I think this year we're getting them at a better discount. So let's say we live in a world, Pat. Let's pretend we live in a world where Derek Carr throws 500 passes. Is it outside the realm of possibility for Michael Thomas to get 100 of those targets?
No, I mean, if he does stay healthy, if Carr stays healthy all season, like I could maybe see Thomas getting to 70 catches, 900 yards, 7 touchdowns. Yep. Does that sound about right to you if he stayed healthy all season?
That's right where I'm at. And maybe, and maybe not a ton more, maybe Olave hits the 100 catch mark, but maybe not, maybe he's in the 90 range. And I think Rashid Shaheed is going to be a factor here. Maybe he gets 50 targets or maybe 75 targets, maybe gets 50 catches. And Mr. Scampers mentions the addition and shockingly positive possible play of Foster Moreau, who comes in with a built-in connection with Derek Carr, and also sinking all of our Juwan Johnson shares, or is he? How worried should we be about Foster Moreau? By the way, if you guys didn't know, if you're out there wondering, he wasn't supposed to play. He went to sign with the Saints initially, Foster Moreau, and was diagnosed with Hodgkin's lymphoma and said he was going to step away for a year. Remarkably, he's been cleared. He's signed with the Saints, and he's in the mix there now. And so he seems like he'll be a factor. Is there any excitement there still for Juwan Johnson, who I think was kind of a trendy late round tight end pick?
Yeah, I mean, I'm still somewhat optimistic. The Moreau news definitely shook my confidence just a little. I think there was like a little thing I wrote for Fantasy Pros pumping up Juwan Johnson, and then Moreau signed like 2 days later. And, it immediately made me regret what I had written, but maybe I shouldn't regret it because maybe Moreau just comes in and is the backup like Adam Troutman was last year, who's now in Denver, of course. So, they needed another guy at tight end. We know Taysom Hill isn't really a true tight end. So, it doesn't fundamentally change the way I feel about Juwan Johnson. I think I moved him down like one spot in my rankings with the addition of Moreau.
Yeah, I think that's fair too. And also, I mean, got to remember, Juwan Johnson is a guy I can remember drafting 2 years ago, hoping he was going to be the thing that I think he will be this year. And sometimes we get like that as fantasy managers. We tend to be a little bit ahead of the curve, or maybe a little more overly optimistic about players in their development. And he flashed. I think there's something there, and part of that's going to be the connection, I think, with Derek Carr, and I think he can make it. He's a great red zone target and showed himself to be an effective weapon there. JSC in the chat notes that Kendrick Miller is one of his favorite late round running backs right now. I think we all agree with that. He's been mocking the hell out of him as his RB4 and 5. I saw him go just in a draft today, I think right around that range as well. And also, James Frey, I think we've kind of worked through who the number 2 and 3 are going to be. I think it's going to be Thomas and Rashid Shaheed, who very promising last year as a rookie, right? Big play threat. So just your view on Kendre Miller, Pat.
Yeah, well, it's funny, Bob. I was actually listening to you and Mike Dempsey with Drew Davenport on Saturday night on the radio while I was driving home from getting some takeout food. And you were talking about the possibility of a Kamara suspension with Drew, who's been all over the Kamara stuff for a long time as an attorney and knowing the ins and outs of the legal situation. You know what I mean? I think most of us are thinking 6 or 8 games, but like, what if they really drop the hammer on Kamara for that? Like, what if it's the whole season, or what if it's 10 games? So then, like, there's definitely a runway for Kendre Miller. And man, he was a fun watch last year for TCU. Like, he is really bursty. I think he's got like a certain juice that maybe Jamal Williams does not have. So man, if Kamara is out for any extended period, like, I certainly expect Miller to have a role. And I'm kind of regretting that I didn't really get him in any of the rookie drafts I've done so far. He just kind of slipped through my grasp. And other running backs I was after in that range, one of whom was mentioned earlier, and maybe we can talk about a little later. But Kendre Miller, I would definitely expect him to have some sort of role, probably some sort of committee with Jamal Williams if Kamara doesn't play. But it's just, until we know what sort of punishment Kamara is going to get, it's really hard to triangulate the value with Kendre Miller, because as of now he's number 3, but there's a chance for him to become fantasy relevant at some point, certainly.
I'm kind of with you there. And I think he's a great late round kind of gamble if you're out there looking for those running backs. And I think everybody's a dart toss when you're getting a little later. He's a good one. And just, I'm kind of with you on the whole, this may not go as easy on Alvin Kamara as maybe some of the more optimistic reporting. It seems like it was a pretty violent attack. It's all on videotape. And so we'll see what happens there. The trial begins July 31st. It's not ideal timing for him. John Bonneville, by the way, still holding out that A.T. Perry flashes, even though John Love had him buried in the rankings. He's a little bit of a different piece there, right? A bigger bodied receiver. I'm not going to get over enthusiastic about that. Also, Hakeem Butler's back. Why aren't we talking about him? No. A.T. Perry, any hopes there in your estimation, Pat?
I just took him in the 4th round of a rookie draft. So, like, it was it's a 14 team draft. So maybe it was a little later. I think it might've been the 5th round had it been under normal circumstances. But yeah, I mean, like, I think Matt Waldman sort of liked him a little bit. And like you said, bigger body, like, can run a little bit, kind of on the skinny side, but intriguing. Like, he's going to be a guy to watch in the preseason for sure.
Yeah, I was talking to Waldman earlier this week and kind of was going through the rookie news, right? And so if you've been on Twitter, many of these things. Bryce Young is very small. Can barely see over his lineman if you watch on the Twitter. Jahmyr Gibbs, he's already got a tweaked ankle. Sam Laporta is the best player on the field in Detroit. Bijan Robinson loves the way the coaches are using him. Tyjae Spears does or doesn't have an ACL. The rookie news is endless, right? Who did we hear was bulking up a little bit? Devin A-Chain. That was a guy we mentioned. I think a lot of people are ready to ride the A-Chain, right? Just like the scheme and everything. How keen are you on Devin A-Chain?
Very keen, Bob. And yes, Devon A-Chain cracked the magical 190-pound barrier.
Look at him go.
So tipping the scales at 192, I think it was. So yeah, I'm really high on him, and I'm sort of hoping that there aren't any veteran signings in Miami that we unexpectedly or expectedly see. Because right now, I mean, he is a younger, burstier version of maybe Raheem Mostert, although I think he brings maybe more to the table than Mostert did. So yeah, like, very exciting landing spot because he gets to work with Mike McDaniel, who runs that wide zone scheme that I think could be just this hand in glove fit for A-Chain. And we saw Mostert, who is a smaller, fast back, have a sort of a mid-career breakout for McDaniel in San Francisco when McDaniel was the running game coordinator. And then, Mostert had a good season for McDaniel last year, age 30. So I kind of fell in love with Achane at Texas A&M. And, he's scat back sized. But he was not used as a scat back at all last year. Like he averaged, I think, 23.6 touches a game and just under 20 carries. And Texas A&M would routinely run him between the tackles. And even though he is a smaller back, he's got that contact balance that sort of reminds me of Warwick Dunn, who was another small, really fast guy who carved out a long and fruitful career as a running back and certainly a plus start him every week type of fantasy guy. And I feel like Achane could be the same guy. I feel like Achane's pass catching talents weren't fully tapped at Texas A&M, even though they did, use him somewhat. I think he averaged like maybe 3.6 catches a game in his final year there. But yeah, and obviously speed is the calling card. A 4.32 at the combine, and I almost thought he was going to go sub 4.3 because he's got a track background and he has put up some crazy times in the 100 and 200 meters at Texas A&M. So really excited about him. Just a matter of whether he, how much competition he's going to have, and is there any new competition on the way?
Yeah, I'll break out the old coaching cliche. There's two things you can't coach, and that's size and speed. And Achane doesn't have one, but he has tons of the other. And every time I see that number, that second number on the 40 time of a low 4, I get excited, especially with running backs. It makes a difference, people. Don't discount it. And just to your point, I think you look at Mostert, a career journeyman, a special teams player prior to his arrival in that San Francisco offense. Jeff Wilson Jr., not a highly touted prospect at any point, right? And basically kind of a clone of Mostert. And if you're the right fit for this offense, and I'm guessing McDaniels knows how to choose those fits. John Bonneville notes the Dolphins, did re-sign the entire running back room, but it's like for a grand total of $6 million. I think that's not even. I think that's correct for this year. So there is room, and I think you bring the young guy in, you're going to use him, and so. And John added, I just hope Dalvin doesn't get cut and signed there. And we're going to talk about Dalvin Cook here. In fact, I want to touch on some of the quarterbacks, some of the other rookies we've mentioned here, but we are going to get into that whole Minnesota Vikings backfield and the Bengals, where there's a little bit of mystery, it seems, in both those cases, or at least some intrigue. Definitely intrigue in Minnesota. There's a lot going on there. But just going back to some of those rookies I mentioned, I think I've been having a hard time figuring out how to value David Montgomery properly. I think he's going to have a great role. I think there's room for both him and Jahmyr Gibbs. There's a lot of talk about using Jahmyr Gibbs in a variety of ways, out of the backfield, split out, etc. How much of that should we buy into? What kind of split are you expecting in terms of, if not carries and, let's go touches. What kind of split are you expecting between Montgomery and Jahmyr Gibbs?
Boy, with touches, I would probably I bet on maybe Montgomery getting more touches, but if we were to replace catches with targets, I think it would be pretty close to 50-50. And, that's probably the sort of thing that Gibbs investors are hoping for, that we get something close to early career Alvin Kamara usage out of Gibbs, where he is not necessarily getting a lot of carries, maybe 10 or 11 a game, but he is getting ample targets. And, we saw Kamara be immensely valuable, getting just barely 10 carries a game, but getting like 100 targets a season.
Every year.
So, yeah. And meanwhile, Mark Ingram was still a very viable, fantasy viable running back as the early down thumper. Maybe would get some goal line work, although I think Sean Payton kind of used to almost rotate those guys at the goal line a little bit. I think Montgomery can still be pretty valuable, and maybe somewhere like in the running back 2, running back 3 border line. Not a guy I think you're gonna. I don't know, Bob, maybe like as we get further into draft season, like people start to get so excited about Gibbs that like Montgomery's ADP starts to slip and he becomes a value at some point. Because like he's very competent, he's not exciting, but man, like he is, he's good at breaking tackles. Like that's what he's pretty good at, and running in confined spaces. And I think he and Gibbs like are very complementary. So I think there's a role for both, and I think they can both be decent acquisitions in fantasy.
Yeah, currently in best ball tens, and I'm looking at since the NFL draft through now and drafts held in that period. Jahmyr Gibbs is, I want to say, running back 17, yes, and David Montgomery is running back 26. So you're getting him outside. I will say that some of the guys that are going after Montgomery, I may be more interested in right now. James Conner, a clear path to workload. Rashad White, clear path to workload. Isaiah Pacheco, but there's a handful of guys. I think people have high hopes for this Detroit team. They're a little bit buzzy, but also great offensive line, right? I mean, I think that makes a huge difference. David Montgomery, do you think he's the guy that gets the goal line touches, or is it going to be more complicated than that?
It might be complicated if it is at all like that New Orleans situation. Like I don't remember Ingram being like the designated automatic no-brainer guy when the ball was at the 2-yard line. And I do think it'll be more complicated than that. So, I mean, like, I think if they've got it at half a yard from there, I'm guessing like they're running some sort of power formation, like it's going to be Montgomery in there, but like not a slam dunk that he's automatically the guy inside the 5 or inside the 3.
We're talking to Pat Fitzmaurice from FantasyPros and BettingPros. You can follow him on Twitter at @Fitz_FF. You probably already do, like I do, and if you do, you're rewarded for that. Sam Laporta, the tight end there in Detroit, I think we're having a lot of hopes. I just want to say, you heard the reporting. He's the best player on the field. It's a rookie mini camp, and Jahmyr Gibbs was not on the field. If Sam Laporta is not the best guy in the field, the Lions screwed up, correct? Right.
Probably, yes. But it's nonetheless encouraging to see that sort of report. And, our college football and NFL draft analyst at Fantasy Pros, Thor Nystrom, was just like really, well, part of it is that, Thor did his graduate school at the University of Iowa. So he might be a little biased, but he did love Sam Laporta, and he was, telling anyone who listened beforehand that he thought Laporta was going to be drafted earlier than people expected, and indeed he was early in the second round. Laporta was really the only bright spot in just a putrid Iowa Hawkeyes offense last year, and he's just like he's good at creating space for himself, getting open, and then he is hard to bring down once he has the ball in his hands. So, we might be looking at a miniature version of George Kittle here, a junior version of George Kittle.
Yeah, he is probably the most consistently drafted player in my dynasty rookie draft so far. So I've been landing him usually in the second round and feeling pretty good about it at this point. I mentioned Bijan Robinson. I don't think we need to dig too deep into this. Is there any way he gets fewer than 300 touches?
Injuries. That's about it, Bob. Knowing how Arthur Smith calls plays, I think it would take some sort of significant injury. Yeah, I mean, I don't know about you. Like the only concern I have with Bijan Robinson is that Desmond Ridder is not going to be able to keep safeties from cheating up, and we're constantly seeing Bijan run up against 8-man fronts, 8-man boxes. That's my main concern.
Yeah, but they were effective last year no matter what when they couldn't throw either.
True. Yeah, exactly. I mean, like Arthur Smith, as I was saying on a show the other day, like some people wake up in the morning and, all they can think of is coffee. I think Arthur Smith wakes up in the morning and, he's immediately thinking about calling running plays. Like that's what he gets up for every day.
At some point, I've seen people out there ranking Kyle Pitts. I think Dwayne McFarland in Fantasy Life, a sharp cookie, someone who I respect, has Kyle Pitts as his tight end 3. Where are your expectations for a tight end Kyle Pitts rebound?
Oh man, I love him so much. Both Kyle and Dwayne, I guess, but more Kyle. Yeah, I want to share Dwayne's enthusiasm on that, and Dwayne is indeed a really sharp guy. I'm just not sure I can, with as much as Arthur Smith wants to run the ball, and with my genuine skepticism about Desmond Ritter's competence at quarterback. And that there aren't really any other great solutions there with Taylor Heineke being the backup. So plus Drake London is there too, and Drake London, even though Kyle Pitts too often disappeared, but I guess I understand Dwayne's point that when Pitts is on the field, he's running a lot of routes, and he's getting a decent target share, but I just question whether there's going to be enough meat on the bone for Pitts to have a tight end 3 season. I mean, that suggests he can match approach the 1,000 yards he had as a rookie. And I'm kind of skeptical about that with what they have in place now. I love Pitts. I mean, I think he's going to have some fantastic years down the road at some point, but I think it might take, a coaching change or a major QB upgrade for that to happen.
Dwayne, big on the route participation of the tight ends. Yeah, loves that stuff. Loves breaking it down. You should check out his work. So let's get into some of the, we talked about some of the rookie storylines that are out there, the hypey storylines. And look, it's not totally just the rookies. Jamar Chase wants to set every receiver record the Bengals have, I'm told today. Devontae Adams thinks he can still be great no matter who the quarterback is. And even if he doesn't like the coach and the GM, or at least what they're doing. His pictures on the Instagram say he still likes those guys. Christian McCaffrey, the trade of the 49ers, the best thing that ever happened to him. Also a great thing that happened to me last year in the leagues I invested in him in because it worked out really well. But those are the kind of stories, that get out there. But there's some real intrigue in some of these teams, the Bengals in particular. They did scrub Dalvin Cook from their Twitter banner, right, and caused a lot of excitement. Dalvin Cook goes away. Alexander Mattison, who they've invested in over the next few years. Cooks do a lot of money. There's a lot of talk out there. We've heard chat that they're looking to do the right thing by him. They're trying to work things out that may or may not include him staying there. A lot of landing spots. So let's kind of go through it. Dalvin Cook's value as not a Viking. Is he still worth investing in at a discount without knowing where he might be playing?
Yeah, if you could maybe get him as a low end running back too, and we certainly have seen, I think, the price dip a little bit now that there's some ambiguity about where he might be playing in 2023. Yeah, but wherever he goes, he is not going to be the undisputed guy anymore, most likely. And when we look at potential landing spots, and maybe you've got some in mind, Bob, but two that jump out are in Florida with Miami, possibly, which would, I guess, throw a little cold water on my Devon A-Chain enthusiasm, unfortunately. And maybe, Rashad White needing some support in Tampa. Right now it's just Rashad White, and I mean, there's some other guys there, but they didn't really draft anyone. They signed Sean Tucker as an undrafted free agent. So yeah, I mean, maybe the days of Dalvin Cook, when healthy, being a 20 carry a game guy are over. But no doubt he is good enough wherever he goes to earn a significant role in a committee at the very least. So, whenever he's healthy, he does produce. I mean, yes, he gets dinged a lot. He's got the trick shoulder, but man, when he's in there, he puts up numbers and, can run, can catch. So, I think he might be a value if he starts to slip too low just because he's no longer anchored to the Vikings and his role is up in the air.
As old people, I demand my discounts, and I'm hoping to get one on him. And John Bonneville mentions in the chat, feels like the Cowboys would be a totally logical spot, and it would.
Cowboys, yes.
I almost feel like it's too logical. They're in Tampa Bay, almost seem too logical. Also both in the NFC, maybe they'll look to move to the AFC. Don't know about that. I've seen people mention the Chargers. They need a back to work with Austin Eckler. I've seen Arizona mentioned, where all my James Conner shares would go away. I think I'm getting a great discount on James Conner right now for an offense that I don't know what else they're going to do early in the season. Not that Colt McCoy can't throw the football. It just seems like it'll be an ideal situation for them to run the ball early. And by the way, I see you in the chat. Hello, Golf Boy. I appreciate everyone coming. I see the comments, and I'll get to the questions as they come up. Mr. Scampers loves the trick shoulder. By the way, surgically repaired that shoulder this offseason. They're hoping it's no longer as tricky as it once was. Mr. Scampers would like us to know that Bijan is good, and I think we can all assess that cats know a lot about football based on that comment. Alexander Mattison, where are you comfortable drafting him as a speculative play right now? Like, we're talking from a perspective, Pat. I think everyone in the chat knows this, but if you're out there drafting right now, you're going to have a number of rosters, right? So you have that freedom to experiment. We're taking that point of view. So, if you're in one league, maybe you don't want to roll those dice. But if you're in multiple leagues, it's not bad to make these speculative plays. Where is a fair price for Alexander Mattison in your estimation?
Boy, as of now, maybe low end running back 2, high end running back 3. Like, that's where I feel pretty comfortable, because right now, it seems like he's locked into a role. And even if they do bring in someone else to maybe provide a little competition with him, or maybe they decide they really like Dwayne McBride, the rookie, and decide to have it be a 2-man committee. Like, if you invest a low end running back 2, high end running back 3, if that's the cost, even if he winds up in a committee, you're not going to take a major loss on that. You're probably going to get something from Alexander Mattison, and this should still be a pretty decent offense. Also in a division with no especially good defenses to fear. So I'd feel pretty good with him about that investment, especially since Mattison seems to have a pretty well-rounded skill set. Like, he can catch passes too. He doesn't necessarily have to come off the field on third downs. So I don't know. Does that sound reasonable to you, Bob?
Yeah, I think so. I was just going to check the Best Ball 10's ADP right now and just kind of see where that's going at. It's just, while I'm looking at that, I'm wondering what you feel about, so we've got probably a 2-year window contractually with Mattison. Does that increase your interest in Dwayne McBride, perhaps in Dynasty, as if you like to, as I do, collect otherwise useless pieces to put on your taxi squad? Maybe he's one that could emerge at some point if you plant that seed.
Yeah, I mean, I know McBride is not really much in the passing game. That's the only thing, that dynasty leagues are usually full point PPR. So, you wonder if there's a kind of a lid on his ceiling and what he could potentially be in the NFL. So, if you're making him available to me late in the 4th round, yep, I'm happy to take him and maybe have him be a piece in my running back room. But not super excited that he could be some sort of, workhorse for Minnesota. I guess maybe if Madison were to get hurt, that could happen. But for the most part, I think he's good enough to maybe be a committee guy and be used on early downs.
I feel like I've invested in every missed swing by the Chargers. I might as well invest in one by the Vikings as well. Maybe one by the Titans named Tyjae Spears. I mentioned him, who might or might not have that ACL.
You're telling me you've got... I was just going to say, you're telling me you've got Josh Kelly and Isaiah Spiller shares I
might even have some Larry Roundtree the third. Yes.
Yes.
And you know how it is in Dynasty, Pat. You never get rid of them. They just sit there and collect dust in a corner. More wide receivers, but I do it with running backs too. I can't help myself. Once I have them, letting go is almost impossible. I hate me for it, but that's how it works. At some point, I'll have to go through and clear out all those rosters. But I do think, when you're throwing darts at some of these guys. By the way, Madison's going as running back 40, which I think is insanely cheap, and I wonder why I don't have more shares of him. And this is the last 3 weeks of Best Ball 10. So people are overlooking him. If you see him out there and you're drafting right now, a great speculative play at that price, cheaper than Ezekiel Elliott. I will let you know. Another situation that people are looking at, and I know Matthew Whitfield mentioned it in the chat, the Bengals backups, but Joe Mixon. To me, it seems like this one's cooled off a little bit. He has some off the field issues that have to be dealt with. This seems like a normal thing for Joe Mixon, not to excuse his behaviors, but it's just kind of something we've become accustomed to. And maybe the Bengals have as well. But Mr. Scampers won't drop Wayne Gallman. I have shares of him as well. But so the Bengals have some interesting pieces after Joe Mixon. Do you think any of them could step up? Matthew mentioned Chase Brown, the rookie. I think a lot of people are starting to talk about, Travion Williams. Coaches have been mentioning him. Seems like a little bit of a reach there. Are there any pieces there now that you think you'd like to, hold on to, or maybe that could rise up at the top if Joe Mixon were to move on?
Boy, Bob, you talk about holding on to dynasty pieces at running back for like years and years and years. There are probably people who have Travion Williams who are like, oh, I'm glad I hung on to him because like all of a sudden he's starting to get a little bit of buzz. And, it seems like he's never fully gotten traction there, but it's interesting that people are still talking about him being potentially useful. I don't know that I'm excited about Chase Brown, but I think he's really interesting because he handled such a heavy load at Illinois. Brett Bielema worked him to the bone pretty much last year when he averaged like 27 carries a game. And when they drafted him, it made me wonder if like maybe Joe Mixon was on the verge of release because they took this guy who was like maybe the truest workhorse in college football last year. So it does look like Mixon is going to stick around. They're not going to release him after all. But Brown does interest me. I mean, like, I know he didn't have a great Senior Bowl week. A lot of people talked about him, having trouble catching passes and just like, would take a handoff and just drop the ball without any sort of contact and didn't really do himself any favors in Senior Bowl week. But then he goes to the combine and runs a 4.4. And I think that got people re-interested in him. So, man, if I was going to put a chip down in someone in the tail end of a 24-round draft or something, I'd be more inclined to do it on Chase Brown, I think, than Travion. But who knows? I mean, I kind of want to see what the preseason games.
Mr. Scampers is heartbroken that we have left Chris Evans out of our conversation here, and I kind of am too because he might be on one or two of my rosters as well.
I've got him on a dynasty roster myself. Yes. So, like Bengals preseason games, Bob, they'll be interesting. Mm-hmm. Like we might not see a lot of Joe Mixon, but I want to see like everyone else in this backfield.
Yeah, I'm kind of with you here. These are all kind of a mess. There's other backfields I think that are really interesting, and a player that I was maybe investing in super cheap. Damian Harris goes to Buffalo. Seemed like maybe a good spot. The Bills talking an awful lot about they'd like Josh Allen not to run the ball as much. He's said, I don't want to run the ball as much. I don't know that he won't run the ball every bit as much as he has in the past, but it just seems like Damian Harris shows up in a good spot. Then they have Latavius Murray. What are we to make of all this? And where are you at on James Cook as well?
Yeah, so I guess I'm most in on James Cook in this backfield. I'm not sure I should just where the Bills drafted him last year. And, I know it took a while for him to sort of get his footing in that offense. But like towards the end of the season, I thought he was looking pretty good. I just wonder if there's ever going to be a 60 reception season for any back in Buffalo. It just doesn't seem like it's going to happen. It's just too easy for Josh Allen to take off running rather than dump it off. We know that's kind of what happens with mobile quarterbacks. They don't bother dumping it off because they can just run and do it themselves. And man, I want to like Cook, but I have to admit, Bob, I am totally vexed by this backfield. I have no idea what it's going to look like, and I've basically been shying away in early best balls just because of the uncertainty.
Yeah, John Bonneville accuses me of the clear Harris bias. It's true. I always support Clan Harris, and I always will. And I have many Damian shares. Quarterback question from JSC. And I think there was one earlier that I want to follow up on as well. He wants to know if he drafts Mahomes, Hurts, or Allen. You're obviously drafting them early. Probably the drafts I've been in. That means inside round 4 for sure. And maybe as high as the end of round 1. I mean, it's been a wild ride for those three in particular. If you get one of those three, do you even bother drafting a backup, or do you just stream and work free agency after the draft or into the season?
Yeah, if it's fewer than like 18 roster spots, I'm not drafting a backup. If there's certain, we know there are different league alignments. If there's one that if you're drafting 20 guys, 12 12 teams, 20-man rosters, sure, I'm drafting a backup. But for the most part, typical 16-player roster, I would just, take the one and leave quarterback be. I'd rather take shots at running backs.
And I kind of agree with that. I mean, I maybe will take some kind of upside play, which brings me to the second part of this question, what was asked earlier. But which rookie quarterbacks are you drafting, if any, in one quarterback redraft leagues?
Yeah, so I like C.J. Stroud long term, but I have no interest in him with that offensive line and that group of pass catchers. I just don't think there's any reason to be excited about him. Bryce Young, maybe draftable if the rosters are a little bigger, 18 men or more, as a quarterback 2. Like, I don't know, in redraft, I think he should probably be ranked somewhere like quarterback 22, right around there. Anthony Richardson is interesting. He has had some helium in his ADP lately. I think, man, I saw an underdog. He's passed like Dak Prescott for ADP. Like I just,
Oh my.
I can't get. I know I can't get on board with that, Bob. Like I'm really excited by the rushing potential. I think the passing numbers are probably not going to be pretty in year one. I think he's capable of becoming a quality NFL passer. He's ahead of Dak now, isn't he? Unbelievable.
Cousins, Daniel Jones, Aaron Rodgers, Geno Smith, still criminally underrated. That guy was quarterback 5 last year, people. I don't know if he's going to be that much horrible. So very interesting there. Yeah. So that is, I see people drafting him, kind of as, maybe going early with him and then getting a steadier guy later, as we can see here by this ADP. They can. I saw the argument made this morning on Twitter that basically his rushing equity alone puts him in like a Justin Fields category who could not throw the ball well. Are you buying into that? Is that something you would do as a second quarterback, or as maybe your first quarterback, getting someone you feel is reliable after that, just, is a bit of a gamble?
Yeah, I mean, I understand that maybe Justin Fields sort of emboldened these Anthony Richardson drafters, because just Fields did not do much at all last year as a passer, but was just lethal as a runner. But boy, Luke Getsy gave Justin Fields license to take off whenever he wanted to. I don't know if it's going to look like that in Indianapolis, because I think they worried that if they let Justin Fields stand back there and try to be a pocket guy, he would have gotten killed last year. And it was funny that, like in PFF's offensive line rankings last year, they would rank the Bears offensive line like in the middle of the pack. And like if you watch Bears games, clearly like that tells you that maybe the PFF graders were more about like identifying mistakes than in what like grading what these offensive lines actually did well. Because like they didn't even attempt to let Justin Fields sit in the pocket or whatever, because I think they just knew that offensive line couldn't do it. And so they were really aggressive with getting him out of the pocket and getting him on the move. I just don't know if it looks that way with the Colts, who, I know their offensive line wasn't quite as good as people were expecting last year, but it's still better than probably what the Bears had last year. So yes. I just don't know if it's going to look the way it did if Anthony Richardson's rookie year is going to look like Justin Fields 2022 for the Bears. If you're doing a best ball, I could see maybe, drafting Richardson aggressively and, backing him up with, Jared Goff, Aaron Rodgers, Kirk Cousins, Dak Prescott. But man, like I can't see drafting him ahead of Dak. I can't see that.
I can't either. And John Bonneville agrees, loves the, and he makes a fair point here. Justin Fields had a lot more college experience than Richardson. It was started 13 games. I mean, so that's worth noting as well. He's a bit of a project. I love the coach they have there to build him up, because that guy has done it with 2 different quarterbacks, 2 different ways. Justin Fields in Los Angeles. He took a whole different approach. They threw the ball a lot more. They ran the ball a lot more in Philadelphia as they developed Jalen Hurts. Last year got the max out of him as with Steichen as the offensive coordinator and calling the plays. So there's a lot to like. I just don't know if there's a lot, how much I need to like it this year. And as a speculative play, I think that's it. I want to play it a little safer at quarterback myself. There are people who don't want to play it safe, Pat, because I'm getting a question about New York Giants wide receivers here. Golf Boy wants to know what your assessment of that receiving core is right now. So we can say there's like 40 slot receivers and Isaiah Hodgins and Darren Waller. That's my assessment. You go now.
The funny thing is, I was trying to figure this out, Bob. I was actually, we at Fantasy Pros opened up our week one rankings. And, since I work at Fantasy Pros, they wanted me to do week one rankings. And I'm looking at it, and I think like the highest I could get for any single Giants receiver was like wide receiver 62 for like week one. But it's just because there's such an amalgam of of pass catchers there. It's Hodgins, Slayton, Jalen Hyatt, Jamison Crowder, Sterling Shepard. Like they've got more guys than they can actually keep. Someone's not going to make that roster there. So, I don't know how to play this. It's funny, and probably Darren Waller is going to lead the team in targets if Darren Waller stays healthy. So, basically right now I know you like Hodgins, Bob. And right now he is probably my favorite of those guys. If I'm drafting someone in redraft, like that's the only one I'm chasing. Dynasty, different story. I drafted Jalen Hyatt in one of my rookie drafts. But right now, like Hodgins seems like the only rosterable guy to me in that big group. It's a mess. Like that's one of the most confounding position groups there is.
If we had a little better feel for where Wan'Dale Robinson will be in his recovery, but there is just a herd of guys that seem like just guys. And I think right now their initial depth charts, they're showing, I want to say Paris Campbell, Slayton and Hodgins as the starters, Hyatt right there, Sterling Shepard, Wan'Dale Robinson. You mentioned they brought in Jamison Crowder, Jeff Smith, some guys that have been around. They've got a handful of guys beyond them. Some we've seen. David Sills is still there, Colin Johnson. So there's a whole slew of players, many of whom won't be on the roster. I think it's for me. And by the way, Hodgins was wide receiver 26, I want to say, from his arrival through week 18. So it's like from week 12 through week 18, 5 of those games starts. Look, none of these receivers are going to win you your fantasy leagues right now. I think Darren Waller is the answer here. So he's essentially, to me, I'm expecting to be the de facto wide receiver 1, get a ton of targets, and kind of be the dominant force, the reliable piece in that on a weekly basis. It's hard to find those reliable pieces there. I do like the fact that they knew Hodgins, Joe Shane, and Brian Dable from their time at Buffalo and brought him over. So I thought that was interesting. John Bonneville brings up a little point here. I saw the Jackson Smith and Jigba versus Lockett. I think we're all too low on Lockett. I think people do not realize he has 100 targets a year in each of the last 4 years. He has at least 8 touchdowns a season, including 10 touchdown seasons in the last 5 years. I think he's kind of an overlooked commodity. So just kind of look at that Seattle receiving core and Geno Smith and tell me where you think they belong.
Yeah, this is one of the things I'm not sure about, because you look at what they have at receiver now, Bob, and you'd think they'd want to go a lot of 11 personnel and run all those guys. But then again, this is like Pete Carroll, who likes to run the ball and has been fond of using a lot of 2 tight end sets in the past. So like I do feel like there's almost going to be some push and pull with JSN and with Tyler Lockett. Like I don't think we're going to be happy with the output for both of those guys this year. Like I think, like one success might come at the expense of the other. So I'm a little cautious with both guys in redraft right now. Like I've kind of been avoiding the Seattle situation, to be honest with you. Like I do think maybe it's possible that like Lockett can still have the sort of season he's been having in that same sort of production. But I feel like if that happens, that means people are going to be really disappointed in the rookie year that JSN is going to have. Because I don't buy that Seattle's going to run a lot of 3 wide out.
Right. Again, you're looking maybe at 500 or slightly more pass attempts by Geno. If I think I think everyone's numbers take a bit of a hit, but mostly maybe it's the tight ends, right? Because they target their tight ends, so maybe the tight ends take a hit. We still get well over 100 for Metcalf, well over 100 for Lockett, and maybe Smith and Jigba. Let's compare this to the Vikings last year, Pat, where we had Jefferson massively targeted. Thielen still got 100. I think Osborne got what? Osborne was pretty heavily targeted. He wasn't 100, but he was up in that range.
A lot, yeah, and plus they onboarded T.J. Hawkinson, and he instantly got like a lot more targets than he was getting in Detroit. The one variable though that might have fed into that was that the Vikings defense was basically a sieve last year. And, the Vikings necessarily had to be in these shootouts. I don't know if that's going to be the case with Seattle, which has actually, made some pretty significant defensive improvements. Like their defense was a lot better last year than I thought it was going to be going in. And, they were sort of attentive to their defense in the draft, after ruining our dynasty dreams by, getting JSN and Zach Charbonnet. When Seattle was really not the landing spot we wanted for those guys.
Yeah, Osborne had 90, and I think Hawkinson, I've talked about it before. There was a 3-game stretch late last season where Hawkinson and Jefferson were tied for the most targets with 37 over a 3-game stretch. So there's a lot of passing there. I don't know if there will be that much passing in Seattle, to be honest with you. And no, Antonio Brown will not tweet himself out in the Giants uniform. It will upset me greatly, Mr. Stanford. Stop that. A couple of quarterback things. Or let's talk. We wanted to talk about these, and I don't want to miss out on them. Sean Payton suggested Javonte Williams could avoid the PUP list to open camp. Pat, that's kind of. I mean, we've all been kind of expecting the worst here because we've heard nothing, and I think that's a fair way to approach it. When you hear nothing, you protect yourself at all costs. Samaje Perine looks like a great value. How much stock are you putting into this notion that Javonte Williams could be ready to open the season, or at least not be on PUP to open camp?
So here's where I'm conflicted, Bob, and maybe I can lay down on the couch and you can talk me through this and be my counselor. I'm not one to generally buy in a lot of injury optimism, especially with multi-ligament tears in knees, like that sort of thing. I mean, we saw how long it took J.K. Dobbins to come back from a multi-ligament tear. And so I'm inherently skeptical. I still think there's a chance that, Javonte opens the season on PUP and we don't see him until October sometime. But I want to buy into the injury optimism, even though it's against my nature, because I loved Javonte before he got hurt, and I was excited about him, and I thought he was maybe a top 5 dynasty running back before the injury. And I am just drooling over the possibility of what he could be in a Sean Payton offense, where we've seen these pass catchers with Alvin Kamara. Because who else is going to catch passes in that backfield? I don't think Samaje Perine is going to be a prolific pass catcher. They have guys like Tyler Beatty and it's kind of wide open for maybe Javonte to not necessarily be a workhorse ball carrier, but to be used liberally as a receiver out of the backfield. And I'm just so excited about what a healthy Javonte Williams could do in Sean Payton's offense. I'm just so worried about buying into that optimism coming off the injury that he's coming off.
Yeah,
are you feeling?
Who did they? Yes, I'm totally feeling. I have. There's 2 players I have 0 shares of right now, and probably the only 2. It's Javonte Williams and Alvin Kamara. Even the clean tears, said Gus Edwards, don't always heal, in a timely manner, right? True. Everyone's different, and we're going to talk about Breece Hall because I think he's, we're hearing a lot of optimism about him. The timing is good. But it's different for everyone, and we should set our expectations. I think anytime you're drafting any of these players, I think the takeaway here should be to insure yourself, right? Have somebody who you think is going to be, maybe busier early in the season. I think the key. Let's look at a guy like Rashad Penny. So Dempsey and I have talked to 2 different beat writers who have been pretty adamant in their belief that Rashad Penny is going to have a way bigger role, like be the lead back in that offense if he's healthy in that Philadelphia rushing attack ahead of DeAndre Swift. And I mean, maybe a piece like that where you think, oh, I might get a month out of him before, something bad happens or they figure other things out. But there are going to be players available later. You need to assure yourself for at least early in the season, at least to have a warm body available. I think that's where I should be at.
Yeah, definitely. And, I can buy into the Penny enthusiasm because he is like maybe best suited for the early down work there. He's got that great offensive line in front of him. Man, I really want to buy in. I've got a couple of shares of him in Dynasty, and those shares seem like they were about to turn to dust until he landed with the Eagles, which seemed like the best possible spot for him.
Yeah, and Mr. Scampers brings up a good point. Peyton was totally vague. I mean, and I'm putting it kindly. He said he could be, possibly maybe ready. We've heard a lot of things. We can go all the way back to Matthew Berry's, training camp or combine buzz, where people were telling him they weren't sure he was going to be able to play this year. And again, I think a lot of this is the lack of information. We are going to kind of blow up in our heads to the worst case scenario. So, and I think that's a wise approach, especially with a multi-ligament injury, as you mentioned. So I think we're probably in the right spot with Javonte, and I may get a share here just because I don't have any, but I'm not going to overinvest.
What about Breece, Bob? Are you
I feel like I'm willing to throw already overinvested.
Are you? Yeah. I mean, but the thing was, like, he sustained that injury pretty early in the season. It was just the ACL. If it's just the ACL and not, also MCL, PCL, LCL, I'm a little more willing to, take the injury optimism and go that route. And especially with that team, as good as Breece Hall looked, I mean, he looked so phenomenal right before he went down. Like the 3 or 4 games beforehand, I mean, my goodness, he was amazing. And just the way that team is going to be with that really good defense, Rodgers to keep the boxes light and keep safeties from cheating up. It just seems like it's such a good situation. A lot of run-friendly game scripts. Man, I'm excited about Breece. I just, hope the recovery stays apace and that he's ready to go for training camp, and we get, maybe even see a little of him in the preseason for a series or two. I kind of doubt that'll happen, but I'm pretty enthusiastic about Breece.
I already feel like I'm overweight on him in my shares, that I was going all in pretty early, and now I've dialed back a little bit. But in a lot of those cases, I think an overlooked commodity, super late in drafts, there's a couple of them. Michael Carter, look, I know they've got a bunch of the big body guys, but Carter was still a pretty effective play. Some of it maybe can help them carry through if Hall isn't ready early and give you something after. I feel the same about Jerick McKinnon. I know last year was maybe not the norm, but the last 2 years, he's been a factor down the stretch. Last year, the last 6 games of the season, he was running back 2, right? I mean, he's clearly getting usage. Are there any players that you're drafting late in drafts, Pat, that you think may have a way more upside than people give them credit for? Are there any guys that you're targeting that you have a special hope for?
Yeah, I mean, McKinnon is an interesting one. And I do like him because we know Isaiah Pacheco does not have a 3-down skill set at all. And, it seems like they're disenchanted with Clyde Edwards-Helaire, to say the least. And it just seems like McKinnon could go back to reprising that role. And, he's a guy who's going to go undrafted in a lot of spots and, possibly could come on. I'm trying to think of who are some other late round, someone's got to catch passes for the Texans, Bob. And I know there were bouts of enthusiasm for Nico Collins a while ago, but it seems like those have disappeared. And I think Nico, if I'm going to plant a flag, I guess, among the pass catchers in Houston, Nico would still be my guy. And it seems like he's really falling through the cracks in drafts. So,
he is.
Yeah, I mean, as a very end of the draft dart throw, I think you could do worse than Nico.
He is one that I have been collecting shares of recently. We'll close it out. We have a last question here on Travis Etienne in round 2 versus Tank Bigsby in round 12. I love these kind of questions because price matters, right? In this case, I'm not keen on Tank Bigsby, but do you think there's like maybe enough potential meat on the bone for him to make this a question?
I think I'm out on both guys at those prices. Like I'm just worried enough, and not only is it Tank Bigsby like possibly threatening early down work with Travis Etienne, like it seems like the Jaguars still want to work JaMychal Hasty into the mix. So like if Etienne doesn't have early down work or third down work to himself, like we know he's going to get the majority of the carries as long as he's held the majority of the touches. But it seems like they want to use these other guys too. And, now they've got all these pass catchers, Christian Kirk, Evan Ingram, Calvin Ridley, Zay Jones. I mean, so I just don't know if there's going to be enough usage for Travis Etienne to justify a second round cost.
I don't feel good about him either. I don't feel great. And part of it is just watching. It's that upright running style, the lack of big play production, all the things that I thought he was going to be as a rookie that he wasn't, right? Like a great receiving asset.
Yeah.
And, for whatever reason, I don't know that I'm blaming him. Maybe the circumstances just aren't working out. But I'm kind of with you, Pat. And I'm with you on a lot of things, Pat. Often on the radio with you because I bring you on as a guest all the time. Happy to have you on here again today. Anything you need to promote and get out there that people must go see right now?
Well, I hope people will check out FantasyPros.com, whether it's our articles or rankings. We do put a lot of content out there for the fantasy football enthusiasts, and people can find me on Twitter at Fitz_FF. And thank you so much for having me, Bob. Always love talking to you, and there's no one I'd rather talk football with.
It's a great time. I appreciate you, man. And thanks for everyone for coming. Good night, Andrea. Good night, John. Thanks, y'all. Good night, Scampers. Dame, appreciate everyone coming. I'll be back Saturday at noon Eastern time. Britt Flynn from the Fantasy Alarm will be the guest there. We'll be on the radio Saturday night, Football Diehards radio program on Sirius XM Fantasy Sports Radio. Jorge Martin will join us on that program. And I believe we'll be covering the Packers and another team with beat writers. Go to FootballDiehards.com. Promo code Diehards to get 15% off on anything you want there. Appreciate everyone.